we're going to continue our sugar odyssey with some of our favorites here. I've done milk chocolate, but what about good old Hershey's syrup? Who doesn't like that? And of course, we can't go on without its companion, caramel. And then we can also throw in some chocolate pudding, and I have to admit it's one of my wife's favorites, Nutella. Well, this really isn't Nutella, but it's Nutella counterfeit. So we're going to go ahead and dilute these down, and we're going to throw them into the freeze dryer and see how they turn out. Now these items have a lot of sugar. In fact, corn syrup is the #1 ingredient in these. And so we're going to dilute them down at least 2 to 1, if not 3 to 1, and we'll see how it comes out. Because these items have so much sugar, I'm going to go ahead and dilute them 1 to 3. So it's going to be 1 part sweetness, sugar, whatever you want to call it, to 3 cups of water. So I got a cup of caramel, cup of chocolate. So we're going to put 3 cups of water for that. I'm going to use 2 of these little Jell-O packs and 3 cups of water, and then the entire contents of this hazelnut spread and 3 cups of water. So we're going to do the chocolate first. And I found it a lot easier if your water is hot. It just mixes better. And yes, this is kind of weird, putting all this water into this, but you got to remember the freeze dryer will take all this water out without any problem. So I'm not going to pour these in my pan right now because the capacity of a pan is around 4 cups. It'll just slosh out. So I'm going to put my pan in the freezer, pull it out a little bit, and then just pour that in and let it freeze. If you don't pre-freeze, then you can do the same thing in the freeze dryer. Just pull the tray out a little bit, just enough so you can pour the liquid into it, gently put it back in, and freeze it in the Harvest Right. So the chocolate is done. Next is caramel. And pudding. I've done pudding once before, but I never watered it down, and it came back pretty good. I mean, there's some crystallization, but we'll do pudding anyway. And you might be saying, well, why even do pudding? Because the pudding itself probably has a pretty good shelf life, but why not? And lastly, the Nutella / hazelnut spread. Okay, so we have all of our liquids here, and we're going to go ahead and put them in the freeze dryer and pre-freeze them, and then into the freeze dryer they go. The freeze dryer is done, and I have some mixed results on my success. The first thing we're going to look at is this is the hazelnut spread, also known as Nutella. It came out pretty decent, a little bit of crystallization, but all in all, not too bad. And I will have to have someone else sample this food for me, since I cannot have chocolate. But I will find out for the blind taste test with family members to see how they like this. It stuck just a little bit to the bottom, but not too bad. So I will grind this up in the food processor. We'll see how this turns out. The next one, this is chocolate pudding. This turned out a lot better. This is really light and it's almost like it's flaky. It has all, it's like sheet upon sheet. It's almost like phyllo pastry. It's the weirdest thing. I'm not sure if you can take a look at that, but it's layered, which is really interesting stuff, and it's just super light. It's like it almost has a consistency of cotton candy, which is really interesting. And if you think about it, all this right here was just 2 pudding cups. So anyway, that's kind of interesting stuff. Now, a little bit disappointed, but this is my caramel sauce. Now, this really crystallized really heavy. So if you take a look, I guess it's got caramel and chocolate together. This was, all this right here is 1 cup of caramel sauce. It had some crystallization, but it was still okay. If I was to do this again, I'd probably add more water. And the last one is, this is the Hershey syrup. Now you think about, there's a lot of crystallization here, but you have to think about that this stuff is mostly sugar. There's very little non-sugar ingredients in this. So this also is kind of fluffy. It's really interesting. But we're going to go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and powder these up and see what happens. To have everything ground up, the first thing we have is caramel sauce, which is basically nothing more than sugar. But this came out really, really interesting. It tastes like caramel flavored malted milk. That's the best way I can describe it. So it's powdered caramel syrup. So this came out really, really good. The next one is Hershey syrup. The good old traditional Hershey syrup came out, and it's also powdered. Unfortunately, I can't taste this because if I do, it'll give me a massive migraine. So anyway, this came out really good, and I'll have to have some of my family members taste test the Hershey syrup. The next is Nutella, or I should say the counterfeit Nutella. And this came out really good too. It's much thicker, it's not as light as the other items, and I think probably because of the almonds that's in here. And it's very dark, it's very, very heavy, it's not as light and powdery as the caramel and chocolate syrup. But that was successful. And the next one is the pudding. So this is the pudding right here. It's very, very, very light. And when I took it out of the tray in the freeze dryer, it looked like phyllo pastry or phyllo pastry, whatever you want to call it, but it had like individual layers. It was really quite interesting. So all together, we have pudding, we have caramel sauce, we have Nutella, and we have chocolate sauce. So all these work rather well. The caramel and the chocolate really crystallized even when they're mixed 1 to 2. 1 cup syrup, 2 cups water. If I was going to do this again, I'd probably do 3 to 4 cups. This really needs to be watered down because there's so much sugar in these syrups. The pudding did well, the Nutella did well, and my wife asked me why. Well, because in my pantry and I was bored. That's why I did it. So I'm not sure if there's any practical application. I think what would be really interesting, especially with this caramel powder, would be to dust a cake with it. So I think in baking applications, all this stuff would make a very interesting dust on cakes or cupcakes. But you could do just about anything with this, and it reconstitutes. Okay, well, talking about reconstitution, let's go ahead and try that. The only one I can have is going to be caramel sauce. So we'll see how the caramel sauce comes back here. Now, this amount right here is only 1 cup of caramel sauce. It's just a little gritty. It just probably needs to be mixed up a little bit more here. Now it's nice and smooth. But that is caramel sauce. So, sweet things can be freeze-dried. They just have to be watered down and diluted a lot. You got to remember that all the water you're going to put in to your food will eventually come out, so it's not a problem. Oils are the worst, salts are going to be the next challenge. Now, one of the problems with these high sugared items is they really absorb moisture really quick. If I left these out, say overnight, they'd probably be a hard gooey glob. So it's important that once you powder these, I'm just going to put them in Ziploc bags and see how long they last. Because of all the sugar they have, these things will last a long time because the sugar itself is going to be a preservative. So anyway, this was a fun little experiment. Try it sometime and see what you think about it. I appreciate your time, and please subscribe, and I will send you another video soon.